The Song of the Welkin Moon chapter in Genshin Impact is now over, which means also the conclusion of Columbina's story, as we now going to Sneznhaya. It's been already a year, however, since Nod-Krai is out, and some player may not remember clearly everything we learned about her during our adventure there. There is also a new player who may start at 7.0 and go straight to Sneznhaya without doing the rest, which means they won't know anything about Columbina and her story, which is, in my opinion, really important, as she may show up again during Sneznhaya for whatever reason. So that's why in today's episode of Chronicle of Teyvat, I'm gonna tell the entire story of Columbina, the fourth moon goddess, and the Fatui Harbinger, the Damselet. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thousands of years after the war of funerary flame, a prophecy foretelling the birth of a new moon goddess came true. From the Kuvanki, within a sanctum, Utar was born. The circumstances surrounding her birth and existence were a mystery, as she couldn't remember anything except a song he constantly sang. A member of the Frost Moon Scion, named Ayla, witnesses her birth and invited Kutar to live with the Scion. He accepted, but soon realized that they were only interested in her power. They saw her as someone who could grant their prayer through offering rather than as a person or a member of their family. After living with them for 400 years, Utar came to believe that the Frostmoon Scion was not truly her home, so she decided to leave. He eventually traveled to Sneznhaya, where the Tsaritsa offered her a new home among the Fatui. Her name was no longer Kutar, but Columbina, the Damselet, the third Harbinger. Unlike her fellow Harbinger, Columbina was never sent on mission, and was kept in Sneznhaya with little to do beside wait. For a while she assisted Dottore with his research into Kuvaki and the Light Realm, but eventually stopped working with him after sensing his malevolent intention. When she asked Her Majesty for a task, the Tsaritsa simply replied, "The time has not yet come." Still, Columbina grew fond of some of her fellow Harbinger, particularly Sandrone, Arlecchino, and Rosaline. Arlecchino once tried to scare Columbina to test her, only to find herself ridden by Columbina Kuvaki power instead. Columbina also knew the truth about Arlecchino, descendant, and the connection to the Crimson Moon dynasty. As for Rosaline, she taught Columbina how to express gratitude toward others. Sandrone's regular tea party gave Columbina an opportunity to grow closer to all three of them. She became especially close to Sandrone, even going as far as singing beside her room. At one point, Columbina and the other Harbinger attended a performance by the Korolevsky troupe, the most popular opera troupe in Sneznhaya. Afterward, the leader of the Harbinger, Darrow, outlined the Tsaritsa plan, collect all the genosis. Once again, Columbina wasn't particularly concerned, since she wasn't being sent on any mission anyway. Before everyone departs for the new assignment, Columbina, Lorquino, and Signora had a tea party again in Sandrone's bedroom to comfort her. She was being visibly saddened by the loss of Alain Guillotin, her creator. After that night, Columbina remained stationed in Sneznhaya alone. In Inazuma, Scaramouche obtained the electrogenosis, but kept it for himself before leaving the factory. At the same time, the Regent Shogun killed Rosaline. When the factory learned of her death, they held a funeral. Throughout the ceremony, Columbina sang beside Rosaline's coffin to express her grief. Months later, the factory suffered another loss when Capitano merged with Lord of the Night. With the loss of two Harbinger, the Tsaritsa finally sent Columbina on a mission. Alongside the Tauren Sandrone, he was dispatched to Nod-Krai to work on a project. However, Columbina soon realized that completing her task would require to expend a tremendous amount of her divine power. At that moment, she began to question whether Fatui truly saw her family and friend not simply as a tool. After some thought, Columbina decided to leave the factory. She realized that they treated her no better than the Frostmoon Scion had. She even began to wonder whether the Harbinger, who had been friendly toward her, were only doing so because of their work together. Her departure also forced everyone under her command to be transferred to the Tower. Columbina then returned to Issy Island, where she met Loma, the High Priestess of the Frostmoon Scion. Loma apologized for the way her ancestor had treated Columbina and offered her a place to hide, the Silver Moon Owl. There, Columbina could rest and recover the strength she had lost while carrying out the Tsaritsa plan. Meanwhile, the factory issued the Palestar Edict, the highest command of the Tsaritsa, ordering them to recover Columbina at any cost. However, it seemed that her former colleague had little interest in retrieving her, or even reporting her, if they happened to encounter her. Some days later, a strange Kuvaki named Lunotar guided the traveler to her domain when Columbina was singing. At first, Columbina thought the traveler had come on behalf of the factory. She soon realized that, however, that they only wanted to ask her some questions. Later, she helped the traveler recover some memories about the spaceship that had brought them to Teyvat. When Columbina learned about the wild hunt, she also learned through her former colleague that the traveler was opposing the Rächer of Solnari, also known as Rächer. At one point, Columbina sensed Rächer fighting the traveler in Sandrone. As he was about to kill them, Columbina used her power to remotely teleport them to safety at her residence in the Silver Moon Hall. Sandrone didn't particularly appreciate her help, then left while Flynn thanks her. Not long afterward, Columbina sensed that her energy was fading and realized it didn't have much time left. Strangely, Sandrone never reported her to the Fatui. The organization was also so busy that they didn't seem particularly interested in capturing her. With that in mind, Columbina decided to venture out more and help the traveler uncover the truth about what had happened to their spaceship. Over the next few days, the travelers spent more time with Columbina, bringing them closer together. They helped a Kuvaki named Malaus gather material for painting, traveled to Eno to repair a lyre, redecorated the field around the hall, helped a lost child find his home, and even assisted a badger in finding Loma. However, these peaceful moments were short-lived, as Warrior soon resurfaced and began targeting Columbina. When he attacked her, the traveler Flynn and Loma were there to help, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Realizing they couldn't defeat him, they decided to flee, with Columbina teleporting everyone to safety. Unfortunately, she suffered a minor injury during the fight, and it was only a matter of time before the Well Aunt found him. Fortunately, Barca rescued them and brought them to the Northern Intelligence Network hideout, where they could discuss a plan to defeat Rächer. Columbina knew she needed more power, and she knew that only a Larkino could help her. She therefore visited the Kuvaki Experimental Design Bureau. Even though she was wanted by the Fatui, she asked Sandrone to arrange a meeting with Alarkino, who could give her access to the iridescent moon marrow. When Alarkino arrived, he saved Columbina and the Traveler from the White Aunt. He then helped them retrieve the iridescent moon marrow from the Crimson Moon subspace. There they found the moon marrow awakened, but still capable of speaking briefly with Columbina, as it's recognizing her before disappearing. As the entire subspace began to collapse, Alarkino managed to save them before they became trapped there forever. With the iridescent moon marrow now in her possession, Columbina restored a large portion of her power. As promised, she entrusted the iridescent moon marrow to Alarkino. However, even if this wasn't enough to overpower Rächer, fortunately Albedo, Duran, and then Slave came up with a plan. Using his knowledge of alchemy and his ability as the gold student, Albedo created a seal capable of siphoning Rächer power. With then Slave assistance, they were about to expel him from Teyvat. Rächer was ultimately imprisoned within the moon reflection for all eternity. With Rächer defeated, Columbina was finally safe, but not for long. The battle against the Sinner had depleted Columbina's strength to the point that she began fading from existence. The only way to prevent this was to go to the moon. Fortunately, the Moon Prayer Night Festival was a perfect opportunity. During the festival, Kuvaki would reach its greatest strength, allowing Columbina to return to the Frost Moon beyond the fall sky. However, days before the festival, Her physical form had deteriorated to the point where she appeared almost like a ghost, and no one could see her anymore. Believing that her time had finally come, Columbina decided to take one last stroll across the land. Then she realized that the traveler could briefly sense her presence. Columbina decided to follow them, watching as they tried to find a way to bring her back. Their solution was to discover a true name. The traveler and the other eventually entered a Hyperborean temple, but Columbina was unable to follow them inside. Thinking it was the end, she returned to the Silver Moon Hall to await her fate. At that very moment, however, the traveler arrived and called out to her as Columbina. Hearing her name allowed Columbina's physical form to be restored. After reuniting with the traveler, she decided to give herself the name Columbina Hipposolenia. Thanks to this, she was able to participate in the Moon Prayer Festival and spend time with all her friends. Afterward, Loma, lurking on the traveler, accompanied Columbina to the Hyperborean temple, where she prepared to leave for the moon. However, as soon as she said her goodbyes and entered the portal, Dottore intercepted her. He seized the moon marrow and used it to freeze time, stopping everyone except the traveler. He then overpowered the other. Realizing that Dottore was borrowing his power from her, Columbina understood that she had no other choice. She willingly removed herself from the equation and entered the moon reflection. By doing so, she prevented Dottore from fully harnessing his new power, forcing him to retreat. The rest of the group then swore to stop Dottore and find a way to locate Columbina. When Columbina woke up, she found herself in a strange, empty space. As she began walking through it, she realized that she was seemingly traveling backward through time. During the various events she witnesses, Columbina tried to influence what was happening, only to realize that she herself had been the cause of several unexplained events that recently occurred. Once she understood that she could truly travel back through time, she tried to find a way to inform her friend about what was happening. She eventually managed to leave a message in the traveler room after they defeated Rächer. The message was later discovered in the present by Nefer and Flins. Columbina continued traveling backward until she encountered Rächer. She immediately became wary of him. However, with the voice of the Abyss no longer influencing him, Rächer had regained his sanity. He apologized for his action and revealed that Dottore had been responsible for his resurrection. To prove that he was sincere, Rächer helped remove several obstacles in Columbina's path before asking her to deliver a message to Tolindus. Columbina agreed. Tolindus then guided her farther down the path, where she eventually encountered the Moon Sister Sonnet. This confirmed that Columbina had traveled incredibly far into the past. She soon encountered the other two sisters, Canon and Arya. Columbina wasted no time explaining the situation. She told the three Moon Sisters about the event that will eventually occur in the future, and explained that she needed their power and authority if she was going to stop the Tory. Seeing her determination, the Moon Sister agreed to help her. However, Columbina offered them something in return. They would grant their final wish. They wanted to return to Teyvat during their own time and finally rest in peace in their homeland. Once the lunar authorities were transferred to Columbina, the three sisters slowly disappeared, becoming the Moon Marrow they were destined to become. With the power of all three moons, Columbina was finally able to execute her plan to return to Teyvat. Combined with Sandrone world formula and its calculation, Columbina managed to return to the world at precisely the right moment, when all the formula conditional events had been successfully fulfilled. With her return, everyone was able to overpower the Tory. Columbina then seemingly killed him with a massive beam of Kuvaki energy. Following the battle, Columbina noticed Sandrone lying on the floor and immediately cradled her in her arms. Saddened by the loss of her friend, she even attempted to use her true authority to revive her, but failed. She then offered word of encouragement to Alertino, who appreciated how much Columbina had grown. Sometime later, the Sarisa revoked the warrant on Columbina, allowing her to go whatever she pleased. This was because the Tory had abused the authority granted by the Palace Star Edict in order to seize her. Now free, Columbina decided to return to the Frost Moon Scion, but this time as a member of the family. She also traveled to the Frost Moon with the Traveler, where they discovered the Traveler spaceship. It had apparently been placed there by the Heavenly Principle. Either something about the spaceship was incompatible with Teyvat, or there were secrets surrounding it that the Heavenly Principle wanted to keep hidden. As they gazed at the planet, the Traveler asked Columbina a few more questions about their next destination, Sneznhaya. When Columbina returned to Teyvat, he revived a Minotaur and granted her free will, while also passing down the memories Minotaur had of the Traveler. Later, Loma the Frost Moon Scion prepared a surprise for Columbina. They delivered a large amount of food while decorating a statue of Columbina with wings. Once they finished, Loma sent a long-plumed ibis to inform Columbina that she should come. Meanwhile, the Traveler asked her not to use Kuvaki to sense her surroundings. When they arrived at the newly refurbished statue, Columbina opened her eyes and looked at it, clearly appreciating its new design. Loma then invited her to a feast, which Columbina happily accepted. At long last, Columbina had everything she had always wanted: freedom, family, friends, and a place where she was accepted by Teyvat. Could finally go anywhere she wanted. And her first destination was hunting. Aware that Sandrone's birthplace was Fontaine, Columbina decided to visit this nation. It was also the Fontainebleau Film Festival, And once in Fontaine, he brought the attention of Xavier from Musketeer Picture, who wanted her to be the lead actress for his movie A Homecoming. However, they were struggling to find a suitable location to film. They then were greeted by Royal Sleep, who suggested the big ship, the Wingalet, as a perfect spot for filming. During one of the shooting, Columbina sensed Sandrone's presence, even though she's supposed to have been killed by the Tory. Unfortunately, she could not physically find her. Sandrone didn't want her to be found until she completed her personal task, and so tried to avoid her. When Sandrone finally finished up resolving her task, Columbina was about to confirm her presence and teleported her to her instantly into her domain. Surprised to see her, he wondered why Sandrone had avoided her, only to be inexplicably grabbed and hugged by her. Columbina was delighted to reunite with her and return to Teyvat, where Xavier captured that moment in a photo. He then introduced Sandrone to the crew, explaining that she was the French was looking for. When the festival was over, Columbina followed the Traveler and Sandrone to Alan's gravesite. They then returned to the Wingalet to attend a party, where she was introduced to more of the Traveler acquaintance, such as Neuvillette, who referred to him as the dragon that cries a lot. He then learned why he put people in prison. Her perspective of his had changed, as she had assumed he was likely belonging to people in prison. When the party was over, Columbina returned to Nod-Krai, and at some point on the Frost Moon, there she met a Canadian, a strange Kuvaki, hurt badly. He brought her back to the Silver Moon Hall, but when she awoke, he tried to find a way to return on the Frost Moon, complete the mission. Thanks to the Traveler help, Ninin managed to return to the moon. There they met Columbina, who assisted them in their investigation into Project Moongazer. As the group discovered the true nature of Project Moongazer, they used their power to help Ninin completing a mission. After activating Project Moongazer, he waited for the Traveler at Traveler Crater and make a promise with the Traveler to accompany and help them should they ever decide to return to their birthplace, if it still exists. And so that was the story of Columbina, who became the new moon goddess and was the fourth. With the lore video I did not long ago about the Three Moon Sister, we covered everything about the Three Moon of Teyvat. However, the end of the Welkin moon doesn't mean her story is over, as Columbina may return to Sneznhaya at some point. Anyway, what do you think of Columbina's story and her character in general? Please leave a comment. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more lore video about Genshin Impact, Legend of Zelda, the Trail series, or Final Fantasy XIV. I'm going sometime theory speculation video about those games, and there is a list of the soundtrack if you want to listen to them. Finally, if interested of seeing me stream, feel free to check Pandragon Gaming channel on YouTube. Thank you for watching all, and may the Moon Goddess be with you. Pandragons offline.